Hello and welcome to The Bottom Line on TVP World. This is where we unpack some of the main business and economic stories of the day. I'm your host, Marie Cato. Russian aggression on Ukraine carries on despite the several packages of sanctions over the last 3 years, Western efforts to support Ukraine throughout the war, and huge economic losses. From the point of energy reviews, Russia is looking at an estimated loss of $450 billion over 3 years. Does that mean that it's now hit a wall? What comes next? Let's go to Jan Kennedy's report.
Over the past 3 years, Western sanctions have been chipping away at the Kremlin's revenues from energy exports. Some estimates suggest that so far, Russia has lost 450 billion euros in trade profits. Experts say, however, that while pinpointing the exact figure is difficult, the overall trend is clear.
It's hard to differentiate what actually sanctions impacted and what not, and what actually global prices made and all increased logistical routes from Russia to India and China actually made. So, but I would say that all these factors combined could impact Russia revenues from fossil fuel, and 450 billion. I wouldn't say it's the most accurate number, but it might be pretty close.
According to calculations by CREA, a Finnish think tank, Russia's revenues from energy sales have slumped from over 1 billion euros per day in early 2022 to about 600 million today. Crude oil remains Russia's primary revenue stream. After the recent slump, oil prices hover around a 2-year low and remain about 40% below what the Kremlin had projected in its annual budget.
They're selling oil at a lower price and they're getting less proceeds in local currency in the domestic market. So that was bad for the corporations, that was bad for budget revenues, and that continues because the ruble is at a quite strong level.
The EU is now pushing to lower the price cap on Russian crude exports. This, however, would require the agreement of all members of the G7 on a decision which the US is currently reluctant to back. But according to experts, allied countries should focus their efforts on doubling down on Russia's so-called shadow fleet, ships that the country uses to bypass sanctions and export oil illicitly.
Shadow fleet needs hit by sanctions, by all sanctions, the OFAC, sanctioned entity by the OFAC, the UK and the EU. If we can tackle that, it will hit pretty heavily, because a third of revenues that Russia earned during the Third War was basically brought by shadow fleet and crude and oil products that it was transported on.
At first glance, it might look like Russia's economy is under severe strain, with double-digit inflation and an eye-watering 21% interest rate. Yet some economists argue that Russia has managed to adapt.
The central bank was quite concerned that the economy was overheating, reaching its capacity, both in terms of labor and capital stock, and they just wanted to slow it down. And now they're saying that it's probably working, and if the economy slows down substantially, they might try to tune the interest rate down a little bit as well. And also the low oil prices might help the central bank in that sense as well.
The EU is looking to ramp up pressure on Russia's oil exports with the next 18th sanctions package. Whether this will be enough to convince Russia to come to the negotiations table and end the war remains to be seen.
Over the last 3 years, economists have suggested that despite Western isolation, the Russian economy has managed to adapt well. But we're getting to a point where question marks are beginning to appear. Joining me now is Olha Zadorozhna, professor of economics at Warsaw's Kozminski University, to tell us more. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So this figure of $450 billion of energy revenue losses due to sanctions, does this mean that A, the sanctions are working, and B, the significance of this figure means that Russia could finally back down? What are your thoughts?
Well, yes, sanctions are working, and the Russian economy definitely feels the effect of sanctions. However, the significance of this number, whether it is significant enough, it's a different question, and it's a difficult one. The Russian economy definitely needs to be sanctioned more if we want to finally see the end of this war.
According to the Finnish think tank, the Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, Russia still gets around $600 million in revenue for energy sales every day, more or less than half of what it used to in 2022. So it's not at loss for revenues.
Definitely. So the falling oil prices and the increased production of oil don't help Russian economy. Currently, in the last week, the prices of Urals, which is the kind of oil that Russia trades, were around $52 per barrel, which is quite a low number for the Russian economy to actually get substantial revenues. But still, it also means that they can use Western tankers to transport their oil overseas, to sell their oil, because there is a kind of price cap which triggers the sanctions to work. And if the oil price is below $60 per barrel, it means that Western companies, insurance companies, and also the Western tankers can actually help Russia sell its oil. So my thoughts are that this price cap needs to be removed, in a sense that just Russian oil needs to be banned, to be traded and to be exported around the world.
Do these figures that we are discussing mean that Russia's economy hasn't actually been doing so well in adapting over the last 3 years and bouncing back from Western isolation?
Well, definitely. So there are two things that I wanted to mention. First of all, the macroeconomic situation is not great, especially starting from 2025. The inflation is increasing. Officially, it's 10%, but the indirect measures suggest that it can be as high as 20%. Meaning that the real wage growth is actually zero, because inflation basically eats it. And so even if the unemployment is down to 2% and people get an increase in wages, but the real wages are not growing anymore. And that's one thing. The second thing is that the interest rate is very high currently, and well, there is no information that it will go down, that the central bank will actually ease it. The oil prices are going down, and it means that the budget deficit may increase in 2025 and 2026. So macroeconomically, the situation is not very good. Yes, Russia has shifted its economy to the war production, to the military sector production, and increased its defense production quite substantially and significantly, obviously. But the key thing here, and an interesting one, is that they produce a lot of military equipment, of military machines, but this equipment gets destroyed on the battlefield. So productively for the economy in the longer term, whatever they produce, it's not going to help the economic growth because it's destroyed on the battlefield.
I'm going to allow myself to just challenge your thoughts here, because we've had a number of economists who specialize in the Russian economy on our shows, and they've always emphasized the fact that the Russian economy has adapted very, very well, despite its challenges. It might not be at its peak, but that it has managed quite well throughout the 3 years, and even now that is doing quite well, in the sense that it might not be at its best growth levels, but it's not crumbling, so to say. There are, people aren't starving. It might not be developing, but there are no protests, shall we say. People aren't starving per se. I just wanted to ask you what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I agree. The Russian economy is not crumbling yet. And that's the key point here. Mm-hmm. So, of course, it is still it is still active, and indeed people are not starving. But then when you compare the level of living of ordinary people in Russia before the full-scale invasion and now, we see quite a big difference. In Moscow, the prices for the apartments, they increased by 50%. Prices for food increased substantially. So the life in Russia is very expensive for just ordinary people, and we need to differentiate between people living in Moscow and St. Petersburg and then other regions, because in just rural areas, in regions outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg, people are barely managing. And one key point here is that a lot of people are now living below the poverty line in Russia. For example, in northern Caucasus, in those areas in Caucasus, the poverty is really increasing significantly, and 45% of children in those areas, they live below the poverty line, which is, it's very disturbing and concerning. So what kind of future this country will have with, men dying on the battlefield, with the increasing rates of alcoholism and, human capital deteriorating?
So are you basically saying that the number of people who actually live in poverty has risen significantly, whereas those who are part of the middle class or the upper middle classes are still coping or still have the privilege of living in leading a pretty comfortable lifestyle?
Well, definitely, at least those people who live in Moscow and bigger urban areas. And the difference in the poverty rates and inequality, they are substantial when it comes to also the Slavic Russians and also the ethnic minorities in Russia. Disproportionately, ethnic minorities were taken to the battlefield. And this is also another, point on Putin's plan to exterminate non-Slavic opposition and non-Slavic minorities in Russia.
So I suppose that leads us on to my next question, where Russia has obviously spent an extortionate amount of its budget on defense and putting the welfare of its citizens on the line. And just feeding into what you said, how long do you think it can carry on like this?
Well, it's very difficult to estimate how long it can carry on. For sure, I think that Western countries need to put even more pressure on Russia with new sanctions, sanctioning the LNG gas supply, sanctioning the shadow fleet, sanctioning the countries that help Russia circumvent the present sanctions. And for example, the tariffs on LNG gas in Europe, LNG gas is still consumed by Germany, for example, through France and Belgium, and the gas pipeline gas is delivered to Hungary and Slovakia and also Czech Republic, and maybe sanctions. It's difficult to include these into the next package of sanctions because of the potential veto of Hungary and Slovakia. But then on the other hand, European Union can increase tariffs on gas, which doesn't require the unanimous decision of all of the countries. So there are ways to still increase pressure on Russian economy. Another thing that I wanted to also mention here in this respect is that if European Union were indeed to increase its military investments and spending to 800 billion euros as announced, that's just that would be really great news for everyone, because Russian economy is just 11% of the collective GDP of the European Union countries, and it means that if European Union spends €1 on the defense, efforts, then Russia would need to spend way more on to have the same amount of the military equipment as the European Union. And so, European Union has very good advantage over Russia, and it should use it for sure. That's one point. And another point I wanted to make is that the peace talks that are currently taking place, they are actually benefiting Russia in a sense that Russia buys time for its economy to still continue working and not collapsing by stalling the issuing of the memorandum that is now being prepared, as they say, etc. And so they're stalling to buy time.
Well, I just wanted to ask. Yes, if I could just interrupt you, because I just wanted to ask, in terms of the 18th package of sanctions, because you touched upon that, do you think that will actually do the trick in terms of, or perhaps bring us a little bit closer to peace? Because the UK has called on its G7 partners to agree to lower the price ceiling for Russian oil, saying that this is the step that is absolutely necessary to increase pressure on Putin to end the war with Ukraine. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, definitely. The lower the price cap, the better it is, in a sense that it will make probably any peace deal more probable, because the Russian economy will have higher probability of collapsing. So definitely, this is something to look forward to.
Well, when you say the Russian economy collapsing, because we talked about that earlier, how will we recognize that moment? What would be, what would stand out in terms of, what would be symptomatic of that collapse?
Well, to be honest, it's difficult to predict what will happen. I've been talking to my parents, and I've been talking to people who experienced the collapse of the Soviet Union. And at the time, the collapse of Soviet Union, no one predicted that. And it was very sudden for many people, although, there was a build-up with the oil prices going down. So there was the build-up in 80s already, but it was very slow. And then suddenly, at one moment, the Soviet Union collapsed. And I think we can experience similar situation with Russian economy here. It may be very sudden. It may be just, one spark, and then it collapses.
Absolutely. But we have inflation at 21%, 40% of the state budget is spent on defense, and nearly 1 million Russian men have been lost in the war. Based on everything that you've shared with us, do you think, how long can Russian society, how long can they carry on like this?
Very difficult question. So I don't have a definite answer here. Indeed, the prices are increasing for the ordinary Russians. They are, living, even if not below the poverty line, but they're kind of like coping very poorly economically. And exactly. So I think what is now needed is a kind of a leadership in Russia, an alternative leadership who can lead the protest, who can lead the potential overthrowing the government of Putin and Putin regime itself. I don't see the clear leader yet, but maybe we will see someone in the near future.
Okay. Olha Zadorozhna, Professor of Economics at Warsaw Kozminski University. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And that concludes The Bottom Line for this week. I was your host, Marie Cato. We bring you the best of regional business Monday to Friday at 5:10 CET on TVP World. And in the meantime, for the latest in regional business, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. And for more news and analysis, stay with us on TVP World. Goodbye.